Welcome, everybody. My name is Rune Ottosen. I'm Vice President of Norwegian PEN, and I'm proud to welcome John Shipton, the father of Julian Assange, who for the last 3 years have been campaigning for the release of his son. He is presently on a European tour and is visiting countries like Germany, Ireland, Italy, Switzerland, Brussels/EU, and now Norway. We are so happy to have you here, despite the difficult and serious circumstances. We will also thank Naomi Colvin for the cooperation making this event possible. Welcome to those of you who are here in this event, and for all of you watching it on Facebook. We are broadcasting live. I will shortly give the floor to Mr. Shipton, who afterwards will be interviewed by the Norwegian journalist Silje Kampesæter, whom I will introduce when they start. Allow me first to say a few words of the background and the reason for why Norwegian PEN are campaigning for Julian Assange. Though the core activities for the Norwegian PEN is to do solidarity work for imprisoned authors and journalists, we see the support for whistleblowers as an part of the struggle for freedom of expression. In 2016, we awarded our prestigious Ostietsky Prize to Edward Snowden. Norwegian PEN has for several months been involved in a campaigning to stop Assange extradition from UK to United States. In the US, as many will know, Julian Assange is facing 18-point charges under the US Espionage Act from 1917, with a potential prison sentence of 175 years. I believe that the demand for the extradition of Julian Assange to a long-term imprisonment in the United States should make the warning bells ring for all those who defend freedom of expression on a global scale. When a man of Australian citizenship can be extradited from UK to United States for publishing activities, we must ask ourselves who will be the next. Norwegian PEN has stated that the arrest and extradition of Assange will be an attack of freedom of expression. We have also been able to get PEN International and the Congress in September in the Philippines to also declare a support for Assange. The case against Assange is, as many of you will know, based on WikiLeaks leaks of secret documents of US war crimes and human rights violation in Iraq and Afghanistan in 2010. These documents, originally leaked by the whistleblower Chelsea Manning, show the true face of the war. Without WikiLeaks, the world would not know about the massive human rights violation and war crimes that have contributed to the chaos we see in the Middle East today. Already after the first revelation in 2010, and it's for these publications that the whole thing is based on, actually. No other questions can disturb this. It's the publication of this. This is the core of the center of the prosecutor's case. Immediately after the release, United States began preparation to put Assange behind doors. After several years of work to find the basis for prosecuting Assange, President Obama's administration gave up. Obama's legal advisors concluded they could not prosecute Assange without also prosecute the New York Times and all the numerous other publications that has published this material. And that this was not compatible with the First Amendment. So, President Trump is not so concerned with constitutional rights and his advisors moved the case again after he came to power. Norwegian PEN, the Norwegian Press Association, the Norwegian Union of Journalists, and the Norwegian Editors Association handed over a letter May this year to the British Embassy on June the 4th, protesting the extradition of Assange to the United States. In the letter, we expressed concern that any conviction against Assange will be a powerful warning to potential sources and whistleblowers on a global scale. We also fear that a ruling against Assange in the future will become a precedent to target any media that publishes leaks and information made available by somebody who has violated the promise of confidentiality. We need to keep in mind that much of the best journalism in the world is based on breach of confidentiality in the first place. The battle to protect whistleblowers will be an important part of the struggle to protect freedom of speech in the year to come, and we in Norwegian PEN are committed to that. So with these words, I would like to welcome you to the stage and sit there and give your short presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. If I may address you as friends, and thank you. All of my presentation seems to be short but severe, so if you forgive me if I sound a little fierce over some matters. First is that all of these publications that we're speaking of are European publications, entirely Europe. Secondly, the staff of WikiLeaks are entirely European. Thirdly, the WikiLeaks was registered as a company in France, again in Europe. So Julian sits in Belmarsh prison for an unresolved European publications that brought information that was very, very valuable to all of us here in Europe, European publications. And it's a crime in most countries that I know of to conceal crimes. If you know of a crime, particularly a war crime, like we see in collateral murder, and you don't report it, you have created an offence. In the United States, 3 years prison maximum. In Australia, similar. In the UK, it has an archaic name, which I can't bring to mind, but similarly, it's against the law. It's against the law to conceal these crimes, for which Julian sits in jail. Sit next. Journalists, publishers, publishing companies are all reduced in their prestige and power if this extradition, this judicial kidnapping goes ahead. All of you are reduced in the capacity to make decisions based upon knowledge. You won't have the knowledge because the publishing companies, the journalists and the publishers will be intimidated, for maybe their businesses ruined by, similarly as happened to the chief executive officer of Huawei, who was judicially kidnapped by the Americans in Canada for an extradition to the United States, in an attempt to ruin or blackmail Huawei. Similarly, Europeans will suffer, and in fact I think do suffer, because since the attack on Julian, the publication of information which is tendentious or difficult has stopped, just stopped. And the mass media speaks as if one voice, particularly in the English language. English language publications, mass media, television, speak in one voice. Now, next is I'd like to thank Miss Pearson, or Persson, I think you pronounce it, in Sweden for her courage a day before yesterday in shelving for the third and final time the allegation against Julian. Third and final time. 4 prosecutors, 2 interviews, 9 years. 9 years confined to a place quarter the size of this. This is prosecutorial persecution of the worst sort. In thanking Miss Persson, I'd also like to point out that Marianne Nye conspired with the Crown Prosecuting Service in the United Kingdom to keep Julian in the embassy all of those years. 2000, and this is documented. I'm not making it up. The documents are there for everybody to see. They're all extracted through FOI. Nobody gave them voluntarily, although we have rights to this information, and it had to be sought in several cases against the United Kingdom and one case against the Swedish prosecuting authority to extract these records. They conspired. In 2013, the Marianne Nye and her associates wrote to the Crown Prosecuting Authority in the United Kingdom saying that we want out. 2013, we want out. The reply from Paul Close, the Crown Prosecuting Service solicitor, is you're not getting cold feet, are you? There's more to this extradition than a simple extradition. It's documented. So, secondly, after thanking Miss Persson, I would like to see Marianne Nye indicted for obstructing justice, as she did for 7.5 years continuously, not just once, continuously, and for reducing the standing of the Swedish prosecuting service to a cipher for the Crown Prosecuting Service, ruining Sweden's reputation throughout the world. There's a problem for Sweden. It's not mine. It's they've ruined their reputation. Also, I'd like to use the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention conclusion and their follow-up report in February for Julian to be given compensation for 9 lost years. Daughters never seen. Sons frightened to go out the door because they'd be hounded. Threats of murder. Hillary Clinton, what did she say? You know, in Shakespeare, the king says, "Who will rid me of this turbulent priest?" We know what that means. It means, who will go and murder him for me? Hillary Clinton, "Can't we drone this guy?" Everybody in the room giggles. Stony-faced, the sneer of cold command on her face doesn't change her expression. So, consequently, we have the FOI. Somebody writes to her and says, "Well, I've got the solution." Years of it. We are witness to this crime. Next. In the what do they call it again? Collateral murder video. you see the two Reuters journalists. Upsets me a bit, this. The two Reuters journalists murdered and 11 other men. The dispatch officer who sent out the journalists is an Australian. He lives in Tasmania. He's been sick with depression ever since. I've met him. He's a decent man. Kristen Hanifson, the editor of WikiLeaks, and Julian went at risk of Kristen's life to Seda City, back then, before Collateral Murder came out, went to Seda City, negotiated with Muqtada al-Sadr to go into Seda City, to interview and try and give names to the dead. Shocking. Not a side you see of Julian, is it? There's nothing more important to us, not to be leaves or beasts, to name the dead. The wall in Washington, every city and town I go to has a memorial for its dead, the names. Not a side you see, is it? That humanity. The last part. I suppose, you know, the tide has turned, as you can see. You're here. When I first started, there'd be 5 people, most of them friends. Yesterday there was an editorial in The Guardian, supportive. A couple of months ago, some months ago, the New York Times, The Guardian, Der Spiegel editorials. So the tide's turned. Naomi Colvin and I, starting from the beginning, I, by myself, stumbled around Europe trying to put together cross-party groups, as we had done in Australia. 11 parliamentarians, 5 silent because they're shadow ministers and such things, supporting. So we tried to do that here, and we tried with some success. So I laid the groundwork for 1.5 months, and then Naomi and I did another 1.5 months, and we have cross-party groups in Germany, cross-party groups forming in Switzerland, cross-party group forming in Ireland, cross-party group in the European Parliament, cross-party group in Greece, cross-party group which will be strong in Spain, cross-party group in New Zealand. It's a worldwide phenomenon of support for Julian, who only published. There's no crime. He's been in jail now, 9 months. Another thing, just the last thing. I wish I could make it funny, but... So if you apply for asylum and you receive it, you're elevated into an area of conventions which are above the laws of the state you are in at the time. Okay, so when you say Julian broke bail, he was elevated above the laws by the acceptance of him into the conventions of the United Nations covering asylum. So you no longer, you transcend the laws of that country, because all of these countries signed the conventions of asylum. So that the United Kingdom signed the convention so Julian would be allowed to travel over their land to take up the asylum. He was never allowed. Even he had an abscessed tooth and wrote his the medical people wrote to the United Kingdom saying, can Julian cross your land, please, just to go to the hospital to fix his tooth? He's got an abscessed tooth, otherwise he might die. No, if he comes out, we'll arrest him. Scandal after scandal, like an avalanche. And yet it's slowly coming right. They say, who is it said, we go mad all at once as a crowd and then come to our senses one by one. I think it was Friedrich Nietzsche. But that's really, I think I've covered everything. But to finish on a more not so much light-hearted, but positive note, what I describe is recent. All of these coming together, PEN here, and all these cross-party groups and newspaper editorials, that is now. So things are changing, and thank you. Thank you for listening. I hope I wasn't too severe.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us. I'd like to invite the Norwegian journalist Silje Kampesæter to join for a conversation. She is an experienced journalist. She's now the online editor in the Norwegian magazine Forsvarsforum. She has earlier been a Middle East correspondent for the Norwegian newspaper Aftenposten and has worked for years with foreign relations. Thank you so much for coming, and I give the floor to the two of you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I just wanted to start out by saying that we'll do a question round in the end.
Oh, okay.
And so if anyone has questions, save them until then, and we'll try to do as many as possible. I just wanted to start out with something you said earlier when you talked about naming the dead, and you said a side of Julian that you don't see. Can you elaborate a little bit about what you mean by that?
Julian, you know, I think he got a prize the other day. I collected it for him. Oh, no, me, I did, which shows compassion. So you don't, you know, you see Julian and WikiLeaks using every skill they possibly can to put before the public the leaks that they've received, every skill, so that the arrangement unspoken between the person who has risked their life to make a leak and Julian and WikiLeaks is we'll do everything, every single thing we can to bring it to the notice of the public, which they do skillfully. But it makes them appear not so multidimensional as they actually are. So, you know, the compassion in realizing that those 11 men can't be named, just slaughtered, and you see the tanks running over their corpses and so on. They have kids, you know, mums, dads. They managed to name 2 out of the 11.
How do you think not seeing that side of Julian affects his case?
It did. It did until, you know, now, and then because we see this joyful young man, his sort of sweet nature, and astounded at what's surrounding him back in 2010. Some say he's handsome. If that's the case, he doesn't look much like me, but some say he's handsome. And then you see the person dragged by 7 policemen, well, it's illegally it seems, I mean illegally it is, out of the Ecuadorian embassy after 2 years of ceaseless surveillance of every moment of his life, even having microphones in the ladies' toilet. You see, because they used the ladies' toilet, thinking that the decency of these people, they wouldn't put microphones in the toilet, especially the ladies' toilet. Well, they did. You see somebody who looks my age, and only a few years previous to that, a joyful face, handsome, presentable. Somebody you'd like to walk down the street with on your arm, you know, and then swollen face and so on. So we can see his humanity now. And, you know, my little efforts help, I'm told. I'm the human face of WikiLeaks, I gather. That's what I'm told. Cranky old thing that I am.
When did you last talk to your son?
Just a few days ago, went to the prison. You know, Nils is an extraordinary man, and with those doctors, what Nils says is true, that the psychological torture that Julian's undergone has had deleterious effects on his psychology and his physiology. It's true. If I describe to you, you know, I just get upset, you know, but he is skinny, anxious, hangs on to me, you know, like, I don't know, looking at your faces, most of you must have children, and you know, when they get bit by a bee or something like that, or some pain, they hang on to you because you can save them, so they think, and most of the time you can, but they hang. So Julian hugs me as we do, but for a minute and a half longer.
What did the two of you talk about?
Sorry?
What did the two of you talk about?
Oh, well, up until lately, not much politics, mostly. Mostly gossip about the mothers of our children and, well, you know, she's doing this and can I do that and can I speak to this one and can we organise for Julian's sister to pop in with her mum and things like that. What would you like for dinner? Because he said, well, I like novelty, as you can imagine. You know, after being here for years and years, I just like, you know, I don't want stuff from across the road. So I wander the streets of London getting another strange-looking dish, you know, and bring it in and have a glass of wine together. And the last Christmas was, they wouldn't let anybody else in but me. So it was just Christmas with Julian and I.
Are you allowed to bring him, so you're allowed to bring him stuff?
Yeah. I'm the only one, or James, or other staff members, because you can't order in. You can't ring up the phone because you never know. You can't be sure of what you're going to get, who interfered with it, who may interfere with it. So there's no, you know, ringing up and take away a pizza.
And now you're on this tour. Where do you currently live?
So, oh, God. I wish I had a home. I live out of a sort of that bag, you know, it's about this big. And Naomi arranges yet another hotel room for me to stay in. Generally, well, I had luck last night. I went to the downstairs here for the restaurant. It's really nice. And sat among the people thinking, oh, I wish that woman would talk to me, or man, or whatever. That, you know, how it is when you travel around, you've all experienced that you wish somebody would say hello, but it's up to yourself to say hello.
And where have you been so far, the countries you've travelled to?
been to Switzerland, Italy twice, France, Germany twice, Norway, Sweden. Strangely enough, the biggest protest we had was in Sweden, in Stockholm. Yeah. 350 people were, free Assange and so on. Yeah.
How long do you normally stay?
Sorry?
How long do you normally stay in each place?
So far I haven't worn out my welcome.
So, and you're leaving again tomorrow?
Yes, tonight I think. Tonight, yeah. Mm. If I could add to that, we'll be back at the last week of January. We'd like to put in a threesome, Julian, Chelsea and Edward, as a Nobel Peace Prize a nomination. And we'll bring David's sculpture here, which you may have seen pictures of. He's recently changed it, but it has Edward and Julian and Edward, and Bradley, and he's changed it now to Chelsea. So we bring that and try and plonk it down outside Parliament or somewhere where we can get permission to, maybe in the foyer of Parliament, because I know they have exhibitions there. It's an artwork and it would be a good place to exhibit.
What is the purpose of traveling around like this?
If vanity would say, all, what does the preacher say? Vanity, vanity, all is vanity, saith the preacher. But vanity would tell me that it gives me the energy to keep going, that actually contributing to the movement towards Julian's freedom, which has within it the reassertion of the conventions governing, the transcendental conventions governing interstate civilized discourse. If Julian is freed, then that raises up again. If Julian's not free, then it collapses into all against all. Mm. Very important that these mechanisms that we've built, especially in the area, that we've built, that have been built since 1945, and how to resolve disputes, how to accommodate each other's self-interest in conventions that exist within the written laws, international laws of the United Nations, really important. Otherwise, we just tear each other to bits, as you can see in Libya, or Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, Sudan, Syria. Rivers of blood. Millions upon millions of displaced people. 20 years of it is finished now, I think. We'll finish it.
You think so?
I think, you're here. Before, it would have been my 5 friends and their couple of friends. So there's the movement. My sensibility is that it's not top-down, that history emerges within us, within our zeitgeist. So my zeitgeist, of course, is altogether different from yours and your contemplations. When in my zeitgeist, even though we had the Club of Rome, there was no horizons. Everything a human being wanted to contemplate was in the grasp just over the horizon. That's how we felt. But young youth, they don't feel like that. There's all sorts of dangers. We didn't have any STD dangers. Women had rights to have relationships. Oh, him, we used to go out together. They can say that. When I was little, you couldn't say that because you would scandalise yourself as going from one man to the other. So that's just trying to oppose the tension between the times. So that I feel within us history emerging, and that history is an insistence that we have civilized discourse between nations after 20 years of terribly destructive wars. An insistence, I feel, because you're here. Julian's case has caused Silje.
I want to go back to something you said, and what was that media, and in particular English media, speaks with, or has been speaking with, one voice. What can you elaborate on that? What voice is that?
Well, you know, you pick up the paper in Sydney or Melbourne, Australia, then you read the same thing in Washington Post and New York Times, and in the London papers, syndicated government announcements, unexamined, as though they are actual news that benefits us to read. That allows governments much too much power. So it has to stop. I don't think I quite got answered your question. Forgive me, I wandered off the track.
No, so you said media has been speaking with one voice.
In the English-speaking world, in particular, Italy is very interesting, you know, because I have my ex-wife has a farm in Umbria, and Gabriele, Julian's brother, he's fluent in Italian and reads Italian. So, you know, Italy has a various news, a variety of news viewpoints, whereas in my country, 70% of the news voice is owned by one corporation. In the United States, 5 corporations own the lot. And these corporations can only exist on government warrant. You know, they have a government warrant to exist in that size and so on. They're protected. So they all speak in one voice, and they don't really want to go much against what the government says, because they won't make money and whatever. Their prestige will decline, and they won't get invited out to dinner in the White House and so on. So they speak in one voice.
What kind of view or perspective do you think that people have of your son? We talked a little bit about the sides that they don't see, but what do they see?
It's very difficult for me, because I just I see him from my friends tell me, look, John, what you've got to do is humanize Julian. That's what your job is, because he's seen as a singularity. You know, he's firm, he's severe, truthful, almost, they tell me, robotic. That's what they say to me. I've got to humanize him. I don't see him that way, but I just do as I'm told, you know, as you can see.
They said in the introduction earlier, it was mentioned that the last 3 years you've been fighting Julian's cause.
Yes.
How did you get into, because the case of Julian is longer?
First of all, Julian and I and 3 others started a political party back in 2011. And Julian rang me up and said, well, you know, I'd like to stand for the Senate. And in Australia, the rules say that if you want to stand for an election, the best thing to do is start a political party, because they have over the line and under the line. Under the line, there's about 200 people putting their hand up. Above the line, there's just the political parties, maybe 7 or 12. So I started a political party, and I've been in deep ever since. Getting deeper all the time. So, but about 3 years ago, we started, so I would ensure that I had a news for Julian once a week. I used to write using, you know, discrete message service. But it sort of grew to every day and every other day. So it seemed I was just drawn in, you know. And then I started to go to the Parliament and talk to people. So I started off, I just spoke to 2 people, and now I can go there and not cover everybody in a week, you know. So and it's, you know, vanity. You would say, "Oh, you're doing something," but I don't think it is. As I tried to point out, I think that history is within us, within the people, and it manifests itself. And I stole that from Tolstoy, by the way, in War and Peace. It's not mine.
Has freedom of speech been an important cause of yours before this?
Yes, you know, I've always put my foot in it. Yeah, yeah. Always, ended up saying a little bit too much. I had uncles. They were my mother's family. They were great uncles, really. They were Catholics, Roman Catholics, Irish extraction. And as a young man, I was always angry. And I'd go in, I'd be earnest. And they practiced gravitas, that I'd be earnest. I'd say the war's got to stop, this Vietnam War thing, blah, 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 intense. They'd say to me, "Oh, John, you'd be wanting to become a Protestant." That's what they say.
Do you think it's difficult for a regular person to follow the case of Julian Assange, your son?
Well, the density is huge. Yes, you're correct. In the FBI has 41,000 pages. The Crown Prosecuting Service has 11,000 pages in their file. My own country has so many pages in its file that one of the reasons for not giving an FOI response is there's too many pages to go through, to look. So, and a lot of the work is sort of groundbreaking, and Julian and WikiLeaks, you know, I think there's, if I could roughly list them, there's an EU law firm, law group, there's a Belgian law group, there's a Spanish law group, there's a German law group, there's a Swedish law group, there's a United States law group, there's the United Kingdom law group, there's the Australian law group, there's one forming in New Zealand. So it's a sort of lot to keep up with. I can't expect anybody, you know, I can rattle off the names, but what they were doing, I don't know, you know. Very big.
Well, how does that affect your job now, fighting his cause?
Well, as you can see, you learn to speak in generalities which give hints of the enormous iceberg underneath. So when you speak of the Swedish thing and I say 9 years, 4 prosecutors, 2 interviewers, 3 cancellations of the case. This is, you know, your imagination expands that. It's huge. I must add one thing here that's really important. Julian and the Per Samuelsson, his lawyer in law group in Sweden, they took court cases to force Marianne Nye to proceed the case. He didn't hide from anything. He took a law case, or 2, that one, because it went up court, so it ended up being 3 times. And eventually, the Supreme Court ordered that the case proceed. You know, he wanted, all they had to do was say, "We won't send you to the United States." And he'd go and answer there. allegations. Answer the questions on the allegations. He fought to do it. Really important, he fought to go and answer those allegations. Not hiding in the embassy. All they had to say is, we won't send you to the... They have a thing called in Sweden, an extradition arrangement between Sweden and the United States called temporary surrender. Sinister. Temporary surrender. I will send you there for 175 years. It's just temporary.
The New York Times wrote in May, they wrote something. The charges are the latest twist in a career which Mr. Assange has morphed from a crusader for radical transparency to fugitive from a Swedish sexual assault investigation to tool of Russia's election interference to criminal defendant in the United States. How do you think all of these elements come into play when people today are to choose side, not to fight or to fight Julian Assange?
Well, in the New York Times, what can I say about the New York Times? Scandalous. That's the New York Times perspective, putting together words that fit a name or ideas that the United States and the CIA have attempted to promulgate and propagandize people with over the years. In Nils Melzer's terms, mobbing and smearing. Mobbing and smearing. Udo Ulf-Kolti is a German man that died last year, wrote a book. He was editor of Allgemeine, a huge German newspaper. He wrote the book. He died at 53. He described how 400 of the most prominent journalists and editors in Europe were in one way or the other suborned by the CIA. In one way or the other. Udo Ulf-Kolti. The book was immensely popular in Germany, a bestseller, and only recently published translated into English. That's the circumstance that we've been living under. That the United States and the CIA, in their determination to make the European states vassals, have taken, where they can, control over what we read. Julian was the opposite. He gave you control. If you want to know this, the other day in Bolivia, there was a coup. Yeah. If you want to know some of the people who are involved, look up WikiLeaks diplomatic cables, and you'll see who, to use common terms, who's a stinker, who's corrupt, who you can't trust, who you can trust. And so it allows you to make common, ordinary judgments about how to live your life and where to go. Simple things, but beautiful, elegant, one-liners, not complex.
Does the source of information matter in this case? And I'm kind of thinking about the democratic emails.
Well, again, the Democratic National Council emails were leaked. The scandal is not who leaked them, but what they contain. That's the scandal. What the leaked emails contain about the ruining of Bernie Sanders' chances and other things, and diverting funds to the Clinton Foundation and so on. That's what those leaks are about. Not whether the Russians are involved, or clearly William Binney and the CIA Veterans for Peace did an analysis. William Binney used to be the director of the NSA. He actually wrote Primus. He wrote Primus. Primus was designed only to extract the data, I've forgotten the word now, it's gone from my mind, but just the names of the people, not the addresses of the people who sent them, not what they contained, metadata. He examined the leaks that were published on WikiLeaks. He examined them and found that it's simply not possible to transfer over the internet that information at the speed registered on the metadata in the messages, in the packets. You can't do it. They're leaks. They came on a USB stick or a disk.
We're not going to go too far into that. We could probably be talking for a long time, but we have to round this thing up. But when will you meet Julian again?
I think I'm going on Saturday morning. Yeah, there's a book launch on Saturday afternoon. A book about Julian in London, and Saturday morning I'll be there. Yeah.
What will you tell him?
I'd say that Oslo was great. Yeah, and that you were kind. And so that, I mean, I'm not. He has enough bad news in his head, so I don't. I bring good news. I say, Oslo's a low-rise city, wide boulevards, good food. We must go there when you're out and thank people. That sort of, that's my job. And then I say, I saw the kids and I'm bringing the entire family over for Christmas, and he'll ask me who is coming. Don't forget this one, don't forget that one. What about Uncle Stephen? Oh, okay. So then I ring, that's our relationship. I just say what we're doing, and he reminds me of what I've left undone.
Well, thank you. We're going to open up for questions now.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Oh.
Not, yeah? In the back? There? Yeah? I just wanted to say one thing first. There was no rush of hands, but let's try to, in case there are more questions coming, and we're a little short in time, so let's try to keep it a bit short, and please no monologues. Yeah, that's it.
Yes. So, of course, it's impossible to say, but I suppose you would know more than us. How likely do you think it is that Julian will be extradited to the United States?
I tell you, I go back to my historical metaphor. And I'll use another metaphor, probably appropriate because we're up north and it's cold. We are like a glacier. We move slow, but nothing stops us. Nothing. And that's how it'll be. Julian will visit on a thank you tour. That's how it'll be.
And the man next. Just, yeah, that way. Oh, here? Okay.
Where am I from? Okay, sorry. I'm not an activist, but I got involved in Unity for J last summer because I thought this was going way out of hand. And I'm just wondering, how can people best help? Now, we see that there is some momentum coming, that there is really change happening now. And how can people best help and contribute?
There's two things you can do. And one of them's very pleasant, actually, is just to have dinner parties and bring your friends to the truth. and that makes momentum of its own nature. They say, you know, we are human beings, and our energies and sources of our energies are each other. You know, none of us are singularities. So when you bring people together, it works. Just like now, it works. And we inspire each other, and then we, you know, work out, well, for example, we'll go on to this action or attend this, or encourage PEN to do more, you know, write letters to the president of PEN saying you're wonderful, but could we do this, and so on.
Back in the back, and then you, yeah.
So I understand that raising awareness is the first step, but in real terms, in practical terms, what are the next steps that need to happen in order to get your son out of jail?
Well, in being case specific in Oslo, it's to ensure that the committee, the Peace Prize Committee, rereads the bequest that Alfred Nobel made and get it right. And of course, Julian and Chelsea and Edward will be nominated. And no three people have done more or suffered more for peace.
Just a pure hypothetical question, really. Both Edward Snowden and Julian Assange has sort of the same fate, but their role there were also very different. Snowden chose the material to be published, as we know, through an edited news media house, while Assange chose WikiLeaks. If he'd asked you for advice back then, what would you advise him to choose?
If he'd have asked me, which he never did actually, but he'd have you know, all the men in this family are sort of a bit funny. I'm here, and if I'd have asked a friend for advice, and so, oh, John, you know, give it up, just learn to cook another dish. All the men are a bit positive. Yeah, so I would have said, oh yeah, let's go, have a go. Let's see what comes of this, you know. I did get a bit anxious when he was in Sweden back in 2010 because a friend who was once you know, an officer in a secret service rang me up and said, oh, it's a dangerous proposition, you know, wandering around Sweden. You could get pushed off a bridge. But I did get a bit, a little sort of thinking, oh, it's not going to go well then. Yeah. But I didn't say anything to anybody. You know. But no, it's like just have a go. It's nice. Mm. It's rough, but it's nice. It's how to say, live dangerously. You only got this one. The other one, or you could be in the other one actually. If you're a Christian, you know, you could be in the next life already. So live dangerously. I say it softly because it is. You know, I have for myself. I have the choice. You know, I have a 5-year-old daughter. She's very pretty. She's 4. And she bosses me around, even worse than Naomi, which I tell you is a lot. And I could be, you know, well, it's summertime now, I could be taking her swimming. And yet here I am. So you make your choices and you don't, you know, you have your regrets, but not those sort of, how can make the magic of this plane. The regrets you have are over sort of lost love or or emotions that don't mesh, you know, things that you'd rather, that didn't sort of work, that didn't mesh well. They're the regrets. Not this. You can't regret life. The regrets are, I would have liked to have made that a fuller result, that's all. But not life itself. I hope that is not too waffly for you.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming here and speaking to us today. I have followed this debate for many years. My main source of news, I should say, is the New York Times and other venues. But I have noticed, you know, you said in your introduction that your job is to humanize Julian.
That's what I'm told.
Yeah,
yeah.
but I think, I was going to say that I think it's easy to underestimate that is so important in this whole battle.
Sorry.
Because when you read the New York Times, when you read the news, there's very little about Julian, you know. When you prick him, he bleeds.
Yeah.
And when you talk about Uncle Stephen, and when you talk about your family, and it brings a whole new, very important perspective, which I think is lacking in the public debate. And I wish you the best, and I just hope that that aspect of the debate somehow become more emphasized. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Forgive me for my overreaction.
Well, thank you.
Is that it?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, John, for sharing your ideas and emotions with us. This has been a very emotional experience for us as well. We want to give you a present. It's a book. You are traveling a lot. So I don't know if you like fishing, but this is an English translation of a Norwegian success novel, Morten Struksnes. He's hunting a huge monster fish in the North Sea. And you can share it with Julian when you read it. And the title is Shark Drunk, and you are hunting sharks, so I think that fits well. And Silje, you will get a book of Norwegian prisoners in exile living in Norway. Thank you to both of you. Thank you for coming. Thank you to Facebook.